sat frozen in the conference room as my brother stood at the front, clicking through slides I had created. My slides, my data, my words. He used the exact phrase I'd coined 3 months ago during development. Then he told the story about our grandmother's bakery, the one I'd shared with him over Chinese takeout in my apartment, the one that explained why customer retention mattered more than acquisition. 27 people sat around that polished table, nodding along. My manager Karen leaned forward, clearly impressed. The VP of Operations smiled. When Derek finished, they applauded. Karen actually stood up to shake his hand. She said, "This is exactly the innovation we needed. Brilliant work." My name wasn't mentioned once. Not in the presentation. Not in the congratulations afterward. I watched him accept praise for 6 months of my nights and weekends. He caught my eye across the room and smiled. Not a guilty smile. A knowing one. I found him in the hallway 15 minutes later, accepting more congratulations from the sales team. My hands shook, but I kept my voice steady. "We need to talk." He followed me to an empty meeting room, still smiling. "That was my project," I said. "Every word of it." He shrugged, loosening his tie like he'd just finished hard work. "You should be grateful I made it sound professional. Your version was too technical. Nobody would have understood it." I stared at him. "I spent 6 months on that." He checked his phone. "And I spent 3 weeks making it executive level. That's how business works, Claire. You do the grunt work, I make it presentable." When I didn't respond, he added almost casually, "Besides, no one would believe you anyway. I'm the senior analyst. You're still just a coordinator." He walked out, leaving me standing there with my career in pieces. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words, but also my childhood. Derek was always the golden child. Louder, more confident, more beloved. When he broke Mom's favorite vase at 8, I got blamed for leaving my backpack where he could trip. When he failed algebra, Dad hired a tutor and praised his C- like it was an A+. When I brought home straight A's, Dad said, "That's expected." Derek learned early that charm could rewrite reality. I learned to stay quiet and work harder, hoping someone would notice. At family dinners, he told stories that made everyone laugh. I sat at the corner of the table, invisible. This wasn't the first time he'd taken credit for my work. In high school, he'd submitted my English essay as his own. In college, he'd used my research for his capstone. But this was different. This was my career, my future. And he'd stolen it like it meant nothing. By Monday morning, my name had disappeared. The follow-up email about the project went to Derek and the executive team. My name wasn't copied. The shared folder I'd created was suddenly owned by him. When I tried to access the latest version, I got an error message. I walked to Karen's office. "I need to talk about the customer retention project." She looked up from her computer, distracted. "Derek's handling that now. He's doing an excellent job." Took a breath. "I developed that project. I have the original files, the research notes, everything." Karen's expression shifted to something between pity and annoyance. "Claire, collaboration means sharing credit. Derek presented it beautifully. Let's not make this personal." Personal. That word landed like a punch. My 6 months of work wasn't personal. It was factual. But facts apparently didn't matter when Derek was involved. I filed a formal complaint with HR on Tuesday. I documented everything. Timestamps on files, email chains, meeting notes where I'd presented early versions to my team. I'd even saved the voice memo from August where I'd explained my methodology. The HR representative, Patricia, listened with a practiced neutral expression. She took notes, asked careful questions, then closed her folder. "This sounds like a collaboration misunderstanding," she said. "Projects evolve through team input. Sometimes the person who presents isn't the only contributor." I showed her the file histories, the dates, the proof. She nodded sympathetically. "I understand you're upset, but Derek has been very clear that this was a team effort. He's actually praised your support work." Support work. My entire concept reduced to support. Patricia stood, signaling the meeting was over. I'd recommend working on communication skills. Make sure you're clearly expressing your contributions during projects. Sunday dinner at Mom's house was torture. Derek arrived late, as always, but everyone waited. When he finally walked in, Dad clapped him on the back. Over pot roast, Derek casually mentioned his successful project. The executives loved it, he said, loading his plate. Karen says I'm on track for promotion. I cut my chicken into smaller and smaller pieces. Mom beamed at him. We're so proud. My cousin Andre asked what the project was about. Derek launched into my explanation, using my words, my structure, my grandmother's bakery story. Everyone listened, impressed. I stayed silent, pushing food around my plate. Then Derek looked at me with that same smile from the conference room. Claire helped with some of the data entry. She's great at that stuff. The table murmured approval. Helpful little sister. I set down my fork. Nobody noticed. Later, when I tried to leave early, my aunt stopped me. Don't be jealous, she whispered. That's just how he is. Always been the achiever. At work, the lies multiplied. Derek started telling people he'd mentored me. In the break room, I overheard him telling James from accounting that he'd brought me along on the project to help me learn executive-level thinking. James nodded, impressed by Derek's generosity. By November, people stopped asking me for project updates. They went straight to Derek. In meetings, when I offered suggestions, Karen would say, "Let's hear what Derek thinks." He'd repeat my exact suggestion 2 minutes later, and everyone would call it brilliant. The rewrites extended beyond the project. Co-workers who'd known me for 3 years suddenly treated me like I was Derek's assistant. One afternoon, I overheard him on a call with the VP. "Claire's detail-oriented," he said. "Perfect for support roles, but she struggles with big-picture thinking." I stood outside his office, hands clenched, listening to him erase me. I drafted my resignation letter on a Thursday night. 2 sentences. Professional and empty. I'd find another job. Start over somewhere Derek hadn't poisoned. But before I sent it, I opened my original project proposal from May. I read through my research, my analysis, my recommendations. Then I noticed something. In Section 4, I'd flagged a potential flaw. The customer retention model assumed stable market conditions. If competition increased or economic factors shifted, the projected ROI would collapse. I'd written an entire subsection about this risk, proposing a contingency framework. I searched Derek's final version. That section was gone, completely deleted. In its place was a single overconfident sentence. Market analysis confirms sustained growth trajectory. I sat back, staring at my screen. He hadn't just stolen my work. He'd removed the one critical safeguard that made it viable. I searched my email archives and found the message I'd sent Derek in September. Subject line: Risk assessment, please review. I'd written 3 paragraphs explaining why the market stability assumption was dangerous. I'd included data showing competitor movement in our sector. I'd literally highlighted the sentence: "Without contingency planning, this project could fail within the first year." His response, sent 11 minutes later: "You're overthinking this. Executives want confidence, not doubt. Leave the strategy to me." Send a follow-up. He'd never responded. Now that flaw was buried in a project the entire executive team believed in. A project they were betting significant resources on. A project Derek would have to defend, explain, and execute. Without understanding any of it, I saved the email thread to 3 different locations. Then I started building a folder. I stopped arguing, stopped trying to prove myself. Instead, I became invisible. I showed up, did my assigned work, attended required meetings. But I also started collecting evidence. Every draft of the project with timestamps. Every email where I'd explained concepts. Meeting notes where colleagues had asked me questions Derek couldn't answer. Voice memos from team sessions where my voice laid out the framework. I organized everything chronologically. created a timeline document, backed it all up to cloud storage and a physical drive. When Derek passed me in the hallway, I smiled politely. When he asked for help with project details, I provided exactly what he requested. Nothing more, nothing less. No warnings. No additional context. Just the bare minimum. I watched him grow more confident, more careless. And I waited. On December 3rd, Karen called an all-hands meeting. The announcement made my pulse quicken. Executive leadership wanted a full presentation to potential investors. Derek would present solo. The conference room erupted in congratulations. Derek stood, accepting handshakes like he'd already closed a deal. The VP explained that 3 major investors wanted to see the customer retention project in action before committing significant capital. This presentation would determine funding for the next fiscal year. Karen beamed. Derek, this is your moment to shine. The presentation was scheduled for December 18th. 2 weeks away. High stakes, high visibility, career-defining. Derek caught my eye across the room and his expression said everything. He'd won. He was the golden child at home and at work. Untouchable. After the meeting, people crowded around him, offering help with preparation. He accepted their praise, playing the humble genius. I returned to my desk and opened my evidence folder. 2 weeks was plenty of time. Not to prepare him, but to prepare myself. Derek appeared at my desk that afternoon, holding a leather portfolio I'd never seen him use before. I need you to prep my talking points, he said. Not ask, stated. Pull together all the detailed data, create backup slides for technical questions, and write speaker notes for the complex sections. I looked up at him. You want me to prepare your presentation? He set the portfolio on my desk like a dismissal notice. You know the boring details. I'll handle the executive messaging. Have everything ready by Friday. I watched him walk away, already on his phone, probably texting someone about drinks to celebrate his upcoming success. Every fiber of my being wanted to refuse. To tell him to prepare his own presentation. But that would tip my hand. Instead, I smiled at his retreating back. Sure, I said to the empty air. I'll help. I spent the next week doing exactly what Derek asked. I created backup slides with detailed data. I pulled together technical specifications. I wrote speaker notes explaining methodologies. Everything he explicitly requested, I provided. But I didn't fix the flaw. I didn't add the risk assessment section. I didn't include the contingency planning I'd originally proposed. I didn't warn him that competitors had shifted market positions since September. When he asked if he was ready, I said yes. When he asked if he'd covered everything, I said the materials looked complete. I wasn't lying. He had everything he'd asked for. He just didn't know what he actually needed. On December 15th, Derek ran through a practice presentation with Karen. He was smooth, confident, perfectly rehearsed. Karen loved it. Afterward, he told me I'd done decent support work. Thanked him. For the first time in 6 months, I wasn't saving him from himself. The weekend before the presentation, Derek posted on social media about his upcoming career milestone. His confidence had transformed into pure arrogance. At Sunday dinner, he spent an hour describing how easy the presentation would be. These investors are sheep, he said, laughing. They'll believe anything if you sell it right. Dad raised his glass in a toast. Mom talked about how she'd always known Derek would achieve great things. I ate quietly, watching my brother build his own trap. Monday morning, he stopped by my desk looking relaxed. You know what your problem always was, Claire, he said. You doubt everything. That's why you'll never get ahead. Success is about confidence, not overthinking. He gestured at himself like proof. I don't waste time worrying about what could go wrong. I focus on what will go right. He nodded. That makes sense. He smiled satisfied. The flaw I'd warned him about 6 months ago was now invisible to him. Not because it wasn't there, but because he'd never bothered to understand the project well enough to see it. December 18th arrived cold and bright. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the executive boardroom. I arrived at 1:30 to help set up equipment. The room filled slowly. Karen, the VP, the CFO, 3 senior directors, and 4 investors I'd never seen before. Everyone wore expensive suits and serious expressions. Derek arrived at 1:55, perfectly timed for maximum impact. He shook hands with the investors, made small talk, projected effortless competence. The VP called the meeting to order at 2 sharp. Derek stepped to the front, connected his laptop, and his opening slide appeared. "Thank you all for being here," he began, voice steady. "Today I'm going to show you the future of customer retention." The first 10 minutes went perfectly. He delivered my research like he'd conducted it himself. He told grandmother's bakery story like it was his memory. The investors nodded, taking notes. Then the questions started. One of the investors, a woman in a gray suit, raised her hand. "You mentioned a 15% improvement in retention. Can you break down the methodology behind that projection?" Derek smiled confidently. "Absolutely. It's based on comprehensive market analysis and customer behavior modeling." She waited. He continued. "The data shows clear trends in our sector that support these numbers." She wasn't satisfied. "What specific variables did you control for in your modeling?" Derek glanced at his notes. "All relevant variables. Consumer spending patterns, engagement metrics, standard industry markers." The investor exchanged a glance with her colleague. "And how did you account for the increased competition in Q3? 3 new players entered the market since summer." Derek hesitated for just a second. "That's factored into the growth trajectory." But his voice had lost certainty. The CFO leaned forward. "Could you walk us through the specific competitive analysis?" Derek clicked to a slide that showed general market data. "As you can see here." His explanation trailed off. The room shifted. Subtle but unmistakable. Investors sat back slightly. Executives narrowed their eyes. Derek's confidence wavered. The VP turned toward me. I was sitting in the back corner where support staff belonged. "Claire, you worked on data collection for this project, correct?" Every eye turned to me. The room went quiet. Derek's face flashed panic before settling into forced casualness. I could refuse to speak. Let him drown alone. But that would look petty, unprofessional. Instead, I stood and walked to the front. Calmly, steadily. "I can clarify," I said. I pulled up a different slide on my laptop, one Derek didn't have. It showed the competitive analysis from my original proposal. The model assumed stable market conditions, I explained. However, I flagged a critical risk in September. 3 new competitors changed the landscape, which would reduce the projected ROI by approximately 30% without contingency planning. Silence. The investor in gray leaned forward. "You flagged this risk. When?" "September 7th, I said. I sent a detailed risk assessment to the project lead. I pulled up my laptop and projected the email onto the screen. Subject line: Risk assessment, please review. Date stamp. September 7th, 2:34 p.m. The 3 paragraphs I'd written were now visible to everyone. The highlighted sentence glowed. Without contingency planning, this project could fail within the first year. Derek's response appeared below it. "You're overthinking this. Executives want confidence, not doubt." The VP spoke carefully. "Do you have the original project files?" I opened my evidence folder. Draft 1 from May, showing my name as sole author. Version history showing every edit I'd made through September. Voice memos from team meetings where my voice explained methodologies. Meeting notes where colleagues asked me technical questions. Email chains where I'd answered questions Derek couldn't. The timeline was undeniable. Derek stood frozen at the front of the room. His face drained of color. The investor in gray studied her notes. "So the core concept, the methodology, the risk analysis, all of that originated with you?" He nodded. "Yes." The CFO spoke next, voice tight. And the risk you flagged was removed from the final version. I pulled up both versions side by side. My original proposal with the entire risk assessment section. Derek's final version with that section deleted, replaced by the overconfident sentence about sustained growth. The evidence was irrefutable. File metadata showed I'd created every original document. Every timestamp pointed to me. Every technical detail came from my research. Derek had presented my work word for word, removed my warnings, and claimed it as his own. The VP looked at Derek. "Do you have an explanation for this?" Derek's mouth opened, closed, opened again. We collaborated. Claire helped with data, but I developed the strategic framework. He stopped, realizing how hollow it sounded when my original files were displayed on the screen. Derek tried again, voice shaking now. The project evolved through team input. I integrated various perspectives and the investor cut him off. "This email is addressed specifically to you, warning about the flaw in your presentation. You dismissed it. Then you presented the flawed version as if it were sound." Derek looked at me, then at the executives. Claire has always been overly cautious. She doesn't understand executive-level thinking. The VP stood. "That's enough." The room went completely silent. "This meeting is paused. Claire, please remain." "Derek, step outside." Derek didn't move for a moment. Then he grabbed his laptop and walked out, not looking at anyone. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I stood at the front of the room, hands steady, breathing measured. The VP turned to the investors. "We'll need to reschedule this presentation. Obviously, there are internal issues we need to address immediately." The investors gathered their materials and left, professional but clearly unimpressed. I remained in the boardroom with Karen, the VP, and the CFO. Nobody spoke for what felt like an hour but was probably 30 seconds. The VP finally broke the silence. "How long has this been happening?" I opened my evidence folder. "This project specifically. 6 months. I proposed the concept in May, developed it through September, flagged the risks Derek ignored, and watched him present it as his own work in October." Karen looked stricken. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Kept my voice level. "I did. To you when my name disappeared from emails. To HR, who called it a collaboration misunderstanding. To Derek, who told me no one would believe me." The CFO reviewed my files, clicking through timestamps and metadata. "This is all documented." He nodded. "Every email, every draft, every meeting note. I have 6 months of documentation." The VP rubbed his temples. "The project is solid." I pulled up my original proposal with the complete risk assessment section. "With proper contingency planning, yes." The VP studied my work for 10 minutes. Asking detailed questions I answered completely. The CFO reviewed financial projections. Karen sat quietly, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Finally the VP closed his laptop. "Claire, I owe you an apology. We failed to protect you from this situation. That's unacceptable." I didn't respond. The CFO spoke next. "Derek will be removed from this project immediately. There will be consequences for this behavior." The VP met my eyes. "We'd like you to lead the corrected version. Full ownership, proper credit, appropriate title change. You'd report directly to me instead of Karen." I let that sink in. Months ago, I would have been grateful just to be acknowledged. Now they were offering me what should have been mine from the beginning. I want my name on all documentation retroactively. I want a formal correction sent to everyone who attended the October presentation. And I want a promotion to senior analyst. The VP nodded. "Done." Just like that. Because they finally had no choice but to see the truth. By 5 p.m., an email went out to the entire department. Subject: Project Reassignment and Leadership Announcement. The message was corporate, careful but clear. Derek was off the customer retention project due to misrepresentation of contributions. I was now senior analyst and project lead. My name appeared in bold at the top. By 6 p.m. people started stopping by my desk. Some apologized. Some claimed they'd always known I was talented. Some pretended nothing had changed. I thanked them all politely and went back to work. The corrected presentation was scheduled for January 8th. I spent the next 2 weeks rebuilding the project the right way, with proper risk assessment, contingency planning, and realistic projections. No Derek. No stolen credit. Just my work finally under my name. On December 23rd, HR sent me updated employment documents reflecting my new title and salary. I signed them at my desk while eating lunch alone, finally at peace. Christmas dinner at Mom's house was different. Derek arrived on time for once, quiet, barely speaking. Dad asked about work. Derek mumbled something about restructuring and changed the subject. Mom tried to fill the silence with talk about recipes. I helped clear dishes, same as always. But then my aunt asked about my promotion. I'd mentioned it casually in a text, not expecting anyone to care. But she'd apparently told the whole family. Senior analyst, she said. That's impressive, Claire. The table went quiet. Derek stared at his plate. Mom looked confused. I thought Derek. She trailed off. Dad frowned. What happened with that project Derek presented? I set down the serving dish. That was my project. Derek presented my work without credit. He was removed. For the first time in my life, no one rushed to defend him. No one said, that's just how he is, or don't be jealous. They just sat there processing. Derek stood and left the table. The golden child pedestal cracked. Not shattered, but cracked. I gave the investor presentation on January 8th. Same boardroom, same investors, but different energy. I walked through my proposal confidently, answered every technical question, explained the risk assessment framework Derek had deleted. When an investor challenged a projection, I showed 3 different scenarios with supporting data. When the CFO asked about implementation, I outlined a realistic timeline. No stolen words. No borrowed confidence. Just my work presented properly. The investors asked for a follow-up meeting. The VP called it exactly what we needed. Karen congratulated me, though she could barely meet my eyes. I thanked her and returned to my desk. That evening, I walked out of the building as snow started falling. Derek's car was in the parking lot. He still worked here, just transferred to a different project under close supervision. I didn't feel triumphant. Felt free. Free from fighting to be believed. Free from being overshadowed. I didn't ruin his career. I just stopped saving him from the truth he'd been hiding behind for 27 years. My name was finally my own.